It's time for some Saturday morning cartoons. Model railway exhibitions are great fun for the whole family, provided, of course, your whole family likes model railways. They offer a chance for people to show off their modelling prowess and expertise with the layouts that they have put so much effort into creating. So I went to the Kyle Model Railway Club's own exhibition in Troon and had a good look at the many layouts there. But we all know that's not what you go to model railway exhibitions for. You're there for the trade stands, the model shops and clubs trying to get rid of the old tender drive 9F that's been sitting in their storeroom for the past 5 years. You want to see if you can get a 158 for £1.58, an EMU with an IOU, or a 37 for under 45. You're here for the bargains. So I went off to Troon to see what I could find. I set off around 10 and after a gruelling hour or so of driving through rural Scotland, I made it to Troon. We have made it to Troon. I searched around the town and found a Red Bull and then eventually the exhibition, so I went on inside. I was greeted by an N-gauge layout not much larger than my own and including a similar idea of a waterfall. But just before I hit them with a cease and desist, I noticed that it was an American, set on the Boston and Maine Railroad. After I was done looking at that, I paid my fee and ventured inside. The first layout I saw was the largest, a 28 by 8 foot scale model of Moorcline Station and the record-breaking Ballochmyle Viaduct in N-gauge. Built in 1840, this still holds the record for the highest surviving railway viaduct in Great Britain, and here was a scale model of it, as well as the station next to it. The station at Moorcline no longer exists according to Google Maps, so this was an interesting glimpse into the past. According to the programme, it was set during modernisation, with a few steam trains running but getting overtaken by diesels. According to the stock being ran, however, the era modelled lay somewhere between 1940 whatever and 2000 and something. There was Hall classes and 2MTs running alongside large logo 37s and a Network Rail log carrier. There was even a cheeky Class 66 hiding in the fiddle yard. Don't think I didn't see you wearing your large logo to blend in. But that's really what this hobby is all about, watching trains go by. And by modelling, you have the freedom of those trains being whatever you wanted. Across from this layout was something of a larger scale but smaller gauge. 009. A bit of a hipster gauge that models 2-foot gauge track at 00 scale. It's been gaining popularity recently with Bachmann's release of its Double Fairley and Pico bringing out the George England 040s. Neither of which were to be found here though, as it was deep in the trenches of World War I, depicting a hastily laid depot moving arms and supplies from a 00 gauge station at one end and a tank depot at Trench at the other. It was completed for the centenary of the armistice in 2018 and was first shown at Model Rail Scotland of that year and has been touring when it can since. Something I liked about this layout is there was care taken away from the railway with the scenery. All around the layout were figures of British Army troops performing various jobs and fighting various unseen threats that really helped bring the layout alive. The attention to detail with the railway was impressive, as well as supports being built into shell craters to keep the line level and the mix of Baldwin tanks and simplexes running the line. The builder drew particular attention to a section of line that ran through a bombed out house. This was something he'd found from a photograph of the time, where the troops would build line through the houses as it was easier than going around or doing a full demolition. These two larger layouts took up half of the display hall, with a few smaller 00 layouts on the other half. One of these was Inverboindy, a freight and passenger station serving a small harbour and distillery not far from Banff in Aberdeenshire. This layout was interesting as the station it depicted was too small to have a runaround for the locomotive to change ends. Luckily, the approach to the station was at an incline, so the locomotive would push the carriages and allow them to roll out of the station and onto the approach. Once over the points, the switch would be thrown and the brakeman will guide the carriages onto the new line at a safe speed. As they rolled back down the incline and onto the new platform, the points would be reset, allowing the locomotive to run over the points and then move back to couple to the other end of the carriages, ready for the return journey. The model replicated this in a creative way by adding a motor and DCC decoder to the carriages and slowly driving them into place. Very impressive in context, but when joining it midway through, as I did, it did look like the carriages were somewhat possessed. According to the modelers, the distillery closed sometime after the layout was set, and a brief look on Google Maps shows no stations near Inverboindy or the larger town of Banff. However, the residents of the smaller version must have been thirstier than their full-size counterparts, as the distillery continued strong into the late 90s and early 2000s, with an EWS Class 37 sitting idle on a harbour, as a ScotRail 158 brings in some thirsty travellers with whiskey on their minds. The owner of said 158 was very pleased with it, as he'd bought it in the Network South Eastern livery and paid to have it repainted into ScotRail, with a fantastic job done as well. Moving further down the hall was another layout with a much more modern yet much less based on a real place maintenance depot. This served both diesel and electric locomotives, with stock such as Class 91s and 92s working alongside Class 66s and 37s, and a resident 08 to help out. A Black 5 could even be seen with a peek behind the curtains, but this sadly didn't feel like working today. A prominent feature of this layout was its forwardmost shed with the side cut out so spectators could see within. A six-wheeled snowplough with clip-in axles had been modified slightly to rest on its middle axle and not hold it to the model. The effect of this was that, when shunted to exactly the right place, a small section of track could be lowered and the wheel could drop out, allowing the inch-high engineers to work on it. This could also be done with a Class 43 in the Seven Cities ScotRail livery, but this would cause the bogies to drop as well and look lopsided. The builder said to me that it was a small layout, so he felt he had to go big on the detail. Finishing the first hall, the excitement kept on coming, and I followed the signs for more exhibitions and was met with where all the trade had been hiding. I was tempted by a Minitrix Sir Nigel Gresley to go with my Minitrix Flying Scotsman, but with 50% of my modern image layout already being steam-hauled, I resisted. An attractive Class 150 Sprinter also caught my eye, with an even more attractive price. Unfortunately, it wasn't in a northern livery, and while I knew that Electra-Rail sold stickers to change this, I didn't quite trust my fine motor skills with a job like that, so I left it to someone who might like to model a more reliable railway company than the one on my line. Moving on, I quickly realised that, much like many other things in my life, my excitement was short-lived and premature. It isn't a difficult realisation to make that in this hobby 00 is king. A huge selection of stock I didn't have space for left the smaller stuff to the side and harder to find. One stall did have some vintage N-gauge, but it was all yank stuff, which doesn't work well when your layout plans include tunnels. One interesting display, however, made a very large break from 00 gauge, a collection of triangle layouts set up as they were designed straight out of the box as if on a kitchen table. TT scale stands for tabletop, and is a rare scale today, but was one manufactured by Triangle between 1957 and 1967. While 00 is modelled to 4mm to the foot, TT is only 3, making it slightly smaller and able to fit on an average dining table. The gentleman was very happy to talk to me about it, and explained that it was developed for those without the space for 00 gauge before N-gauge came in and took over. He had started collecting in 1968, and hadn't stopped since, consequently had quite the display featuring 6 working layouts and several more locomotives, one of which was a blue Class 91 that had been manufactured exclusively in Calais for the British market and was thus very rare. He claimed it was worth £1,000 or more. Another eye-catching piece was a bullied West Country class with an all-over chrome gold finish. He didn't give me a figure for this, but mentioned that it was one of 400 made, and was worth a fair bit because of this. It certainly stood out on the shelf of all the other examples, looking like its last owner was a high-profile drug dealer with an unexpected hobby. The elephant in the room was about the size of one. a 21 foot by 9 foot double O gauge model of somewhere and nowhere. I spoke to one of its operators who talked about how it could be anywhere in the country in any time period with a wide array of stock to match. When I first arrived, a DCC sound-fitted Flying Scotsman in Brunswick Green with the smoke deflectors and smoke emitters fitted was hauling a full rake over a seawall through a station before it disappeared into a tunnel under a concert. It ran back through a long, fully detailed depot-stroke-fiddle yard to go back round again. When I returned to the layout, a Class 66 was hauling freight while two 37s pulled a measurement train the other way. An interesting and easily missed detail, however, was the departure boards. These were micro Arduino controllers running screens in a 3D printed housing to make an extremely realistic dot matrix sign. This added so much realism to the station it was placed on. Two interesting things about the layout caught my attention. First, that it was controlled by the operator's phones. According to the driver, it works through Wi-Fi to connect to a controller on the track, with the interface being on the phone. The portability that comes with this makes operation extremely easy to manage. He also told me a story of where he would blend in with spectators at events and make the trains look as if they were driving themselves. The other thing I didn't notice till soon before I was leaving was the waterfall running under a viaduct that was using real water. I didn't get a chance to discuss this, but it was still a very interesting way of adding life to the layout. The last layout of the day was the only O-gauge offering, a small branch line station of a heritage line, not based on any particular railway, but if a location had to be named it would be around West Somerset. A heritage line is a backstory I've used when building a layout with my dad to explain why we were running whatever trains we wanted, so I can understand the motivations behind it. And so, with the intoxicating sea air filling my lungs and a macaroni cheese pie filling my stomach, I decided I had enough of Troon and went home. So, what did I get then? Well, as I mentioned earlier, double O gauge is king in this hobby, so there isn't really that much in N gauge. But I did manage to find a couple of bargains. Now, when I started this hobby, I didn't have any track, I didn't have any stock, I didn't have any scenery. All I had was a space and this. A Dapol Class 66, number 66008. I'll do a video on this in the future, but that was it. I bought a loco with the intent on building an N-gauge railway. I had nothing for the loco to pull. So, first chance I could, I went into the same model shop, and so I got three BR Mark I coaches in BR blue. But I made a mistake, because you might notice 3 of these coaches are brake composite coaches, which might sound a bit rivet countery to me, but going round with just 3 coaches, 2 of which were brakes, behind a 66, it just looked a bit weird. And so for £8, which I think was the price I paid for each of these coaches, I found another one. And this time I made sure it wasn't a brake coach. And so in a rake of 4 with a brake coach at each end, it actually looks pretty good. And if you've followed my Instagram, you've no doubt seen plenty of videos of this being pulled behind my Flying Scotsman. Another loco I shall do a video on. However, one thing about the Class 66, it is not a passenger locomotive. It was not designed for passenger use. It was designed for freight use. And I cannot afford modern image freight stock. So, for £15, I bought 3 of these. Yes, I know what you're thinking. It looks like it's come out of a mine. And it probably has. It's mini tricks made, unspecified basis, side tipping wagon of some description. It's German, it's small, and it's not very commonly seen. But I've got a theory. So my layout is based somewhere around the Settle Carlisle. And on the Settle Carlisle there's a few quarries. And in the quarries, maybe they need stock to move around bits of aggregate from one part of the quarry to another. And then maybe sometimes these pieces of stock leave quarries and go to different quarries. And this is what they could get. Plus, 3 of them doesn't look bad behind the 66. I mean, it could use a longer train, of course, but hey, it's stock and it's something to pull. And there we go. Kyle Model Railway Exhibition as seen in Troon in 2022. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a like, give it a share, give it a subscribe if you do, and hope to see you again for more of this rubbish.